12 warriors fought for the Apache girl's hand. But she pointed at the cowboy alone. The land was bone-dry and wide as a broken heart. Dust lingered in the stillness, curling over the flat horizon like it had nowhere else to go. Old wagon wheels lay half-buried in sand, their wooden spokes splintered from years of forgotten stories. The desert didn't move. It just watched. A single cabin stood like a leftover promise, crooked, sun-bleached, its roof patched with rusted tin. Beside it, a pale brown horse flicked its tail in lazy circles, tethered to a post that leaned like it might give up. The only sound was the creak of a porch swing moving in the wind, though no one was sitting in it. Inside, the man they called Boone sat hunched over a chipped coffee mug, hands as weathered as old leather. His face was half hidden by a faded hat, his boots planted wide apart on creaking floorboards. A scar curved beneath his right cheekbone, the kind that never needed explaining. He didn't speak unless spoken to. And even then, mostly didn't. Boone wasn't born for noise. He'd come west to escape it. The gunshots, the orders, the screaming of men who didn't know what they were dying for. Out here, everything was quieter. Out here, the ghosts stayed where you left them, until they didn't. The knock was soft, hesitant. He didn't move right away. Most folks who came out this far were either lost or desperate. He wasn't in the mood to deal with either. Still, something in that knock wasn't asking. It was hoping. He opened the door. She stood there barefoot. A young Apache girl, maybe 16. Her skin the shade of river clay. Her black hair matted with wind and dust. Her eyes were fierce and wet, and staring past him like she wasn't sure if she was safe or already dead. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her wrists were raw, blood dried into the fabric of a torn shawl. Her breath came in short, shallow pulls, and in her silence there was a scream loud enough to stop the wind. Boone stepped aside. She didn't hesitate. She walked in. And for the first time in a long while, Boone forgot what silence was. She hadn't said a word in hours. Boone gave her space, poured a tin cup of water, left it on the table, then went back to splitting wood out back. When he returned, the cup was empty, but the girl hadn't moved. She sat on the edge of the small cot in the corner, wrapped in a blanket he'd fetched from the storage trunk. Her eyes tracked him, wary but calm, like a wounded animal too tired to run. He didn't ask questions. He'd seen what men did to those who couldn't fight back, in war, in towns, in families. He knew that kind of silence. It wasn't just fear. It was survival. Boone lit a fire in the old stove and busied himself with coffee he didn't want. He could feel the weight of her presence like a bruise forming beneath the skin. Every now and then he'd glance her way. Her hands clutched tight in her lap, fingers twitching slightly, like she was trying to hold herself together. A scar ran up her forearm. Old, faint, but familiar. Boone looked away and saw something else. A younger version of himself crouched beside a burning barn, the screams of his sister echoing inside. He'd been too late, too scared. The last thing she'd said to him was his name. He shook it off, hard. That was 20 years ago. This was now. Still, the memories pressed in. The way his father's belt sounded cutting air, the way the army sergeant barked orders like cattle commands, the way he'd watched others suffer and learned to stay quiet, learned to walk away. And he could walk away now. No law tied him to her, no name, no promise, just a quiet girl with fire in her eyes and bruises she wasn't ready to name. He could let the sun rise tomorrow and pretend today never happened. But then she shifted, just slightly. The blanket slid off her shoulder, revealing a deep purple mark along her collarbone. Boone didn't flinch. He just stared at it for a moment, like it was a word he'd never learned but somehow understood. He stood slowly, took off his jacket, draped it over her shoulders without a word. She didn't resist. Didn't thank him either. She just pulled it tight and leaned ever so slightly toward the fire. That was answer enough. Boone walked to the door, locked it, and slid the rifle from behind the wall. If trouble was coming, he'd meet it standing. She wouldn't run alone again. By the second morning, Boone noticed the dust trail. A thin ribbon across the far ridge, too fast to be a trader, too steady to be wind. Someone was coming, and they weren't wandering. He didn't tell the girl. She was still silent, still watching the world like it might bite her again if she blinked too long. But Boone noticed how she flinched at hooves in the distance, how she'd freeze at certain sounds. A cough, a man's voice on the wind, the slam of the cabin door. Someone had done that to her. He waited until she was asleep, or pretending to be, before he rummaged through the satchel she kept close. Not out of disrespect, out of survival. Inside, a knife, old and rusted. A torn piece of cloth, military insignia stitched on it, barely visible, and a letter, crumpled, but sealed with a wax mark he recognized. Not military, not federal, private militia. Hired guns. He'd crossed them once in Arizona long before the war ended. They called themselves the 12, a band of men who acted like kings, carving land out of native territory under the excuse of debt collection and border law, ruthless, well-connected, and protected by silence. They didn't arrest people, they erased them. And now they were riding here. Boone stared at the seal for a long time. The wax was black. That meant the message wasn't official. It was personal. The girl stirred. He looked up. She was awake now, eyes locked on the paper in his hand. No tears, no panic. Just that same steady hurt that hadn't left her face since she arrived. "You ran from them?" he asked quietly. She didn't nod, didn't speak. Just reached up and traced the scar on her own collarbone with 2 fingers, slowly. Boone understood. She wasn't just a runaway. She was a witness. Maybe more. Maybe the daughter of someone they couldn't break, or someone they had. Maybe a pawn that turned into a liability. Whatever it was, she didn't escape by chance. She survived something. Now she was dragging that danger here. Boone stood, poured water into a tin bowl, and began cleaning his rifle. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sun hung low, red and swollen, like a blood moon waiting to rise. He didn't know her story in full, but he knew one thing for sure. Men like the 12 didn't ride this far just to talk. And if they came for her, they'd have to get through him. They never spoke of it. Not the scars, not the men, not the weight each carried like gravel in their lungs. But silence has its own language, and Boone, for once, was fluent in something besides regret. The girl, he still didn't know her name, followed him outside on the 3rd day. He didn't ask why. She simply stood beside him as he loaded the rifle. Her eyes scanned the hills, sharp, focused. He handed it to her, not to test her, to trust her. She took it without hesitation, a slight tremble in her grip, but she adjusted. Boone knelt beside her, guided her hands with quiet patience. When she fired, the shot rang true, cutting through the still air and striking the tin can dead off the fence post. Her shoulders jolted, then stilled. He didn't smile, but something inside him did. That night, they ate in silence, beans and rabbit over fire. Boone carved a piece of wood while she watched, slowly scooping the shape of a bird in flight. He placed it on the windowsill before turning in. The next morning, it was gone from the sill, but tucked gently beside his coffee mug. That was how they spoke, through small acts. One night, she walked to the mirror and pulled her shawl down slightly, showed him the old branding mark, a twisted spiral burned near her shoulder blade, a symbol he recognized. Property. Boone didn't ask who did it. He just stood, unbuttoned his shirt halfway, and turned his back. There, across his spine, a jagged line from shrapnel, and another just below it, cleaner, deeper, from a belt buckle. He didn't say where or why, but now she knew he didn't come from softness either. Their scars spoke in the quiet. On the fourth evening, she took his hand and placed it on a small knot in the cabin wall. A child's etching, faint but still there. A circle, a horse, a stick figure holding a flower. Boone had carved it long ago, when the house had laughter, when his sister still sang. He had buried that version of himself with her, or tried to. Now the girl, this fierce, wounded soul, was drawing it back out, piece by piece. Later, as the sky bled purple and gold over the desert, they sat outside together, side by side. No words, just the soft rhythm of wind and the sound of her whittling a second bird, smaller, rougher, to sit next to his. For a moment, there was peace. Not safety, not forever, but enough. The first rider crested the ridge at dusk, silhouetted against a bleeding sky, dust swirling around his horse like smoke. 11 more followed, spaced wide, rifles slung, silence thick. The 12 had come. Boone stood on the porch, shotgun in hand, hat pulled low. Inside, the girl sat by the fire, clutching the second wooden bird he'd carved for her the night before. She didn't ask what was happening. She already knew. The men didn't shout, didn't call his name. They just stopped about 50 feet from the cabin and waited, boots kicking up dust, eyes hidden beneath brims and bandanas. At their center, a man with silver rings and a black wax seal pinned to his lapel, dismounted. Boone remembered him. Marshal Dwayne Calder, ex-cavalry, now dressed in Lee, all but rotten with ambition. He walked like he owned the land, like men were cattle, like girls didn't matter. "You got something that don't belong to you, Boone," Calder said, voice smooth as oil. "We just came to collect." Boone didn't move. "She ain't property." Calder chuckled, then stepped forward, boots crunching. "You think you're some savior? You got no stake in this." She ran. She signed papers. She was meant to serve. Her family owed. This ain't about you. But it was. It always had been. Boone took one step forward. "She's a child." Calder's smile dropped. "You shoot one of us," he warned, "and 12 more ride in after sundown. This isn't your war." Boone's voice was quiet, almost tender. "It wasn't my sister's either, but they still took her." A long silence. Calder reached for his holster, and Boone moved. The first shot cracked like thunder. One man dropped, then another. Boone didn't wait. He moved through the smoke like a man who'd already made peace with dying. He took a bullet in the shoulder. Another grazed his ribs, but he didn't stop. From inside, the girl heard screams, gunfire, hooves fleeing, metal against wood. She crouched low, clutching the rifle Boone had trained her to hold, heart pounding in her ears. Then, silence. Long and sharp. The door creaked open. Boone staggered inside, blood soaking his shirt. He collapsed to one knee. She ran to him, catching his weight. He smiled through broken breath. "You hold the line now, girl." She shook her head, tears finally falling. "You're not leaving," she whispered. But he was already gone, his hand still holding the second bird, the one she had carved. Outside, the desert swallowed the sun whole. Inside, the girl knelt beside the only man who had ever fought for her, not for payment, not for law, just because. The fire had gone out by dawn. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney, chased by the wind. And the desert was quiet again, but it was no longer the same quiet. Something had shifted, like the land had swallowed grief and was holding it just beneath the dust. She buried Boone behind the cabin beneath a cottonwood that barely held its leaves, dug the earth with her own hands until her nails split and the skin bled. No tears now, just the work, the ritual, the goodbye he never got to give his sister. She placed both carved birds on the grave. No words, no stone. Just two small things that once sat on a windowsill, watching a world that never offered mercy. His jacket swallowed her shoulders as she stood. She didn't take the rifle. She didn't need it anymore. The bodies of the men who followed Calder lay scattered in the sand. Some had crawled yards before dying, others hadn't moved at all. Horses wandered off. Boots were missing. Guns rusted in their holsters. The desert took back what it always did. Arrogance, blood, names. Calder had lived. Barely. She found him slumped against a rock, wheezing, clutching his side where Boone had shot clean through. His hat was gone. His belt was broken. He looked up at her like a child, confused, scared, undone. She said nothing, just looked at him, then walked away. Not because he deserved mercy, but because Boone would have said it was enough. She found the trail by noon, a narrow path Boone had once spoken of as he carved wood in silence. "Head west," he had muttered. "Sun at your back. River'll find you." She followed the sun now. The wind tugged at her shawl, her feet were blistered, her throat dry. But she didn't stop, didn't look back. Just walked, mile after mile, until the hills faded and the brush thickened, and the sound of moving water whispered on the air. She didn't know where the river would take her, didn't know what name she'd carry or who she'd become. But she knew what she wasn't anymore. Not a ghost, not a property, not a girl who waited for help. She was someone who had been chosen, protected, fought for. And now she would carry that weight, not as burden, but as memory, as promise. Years pass, but the cabin never crumbled. Locals who dared ride that far west said the porch still creaked in the wind, that a cottonwood tree grew wide beside the lone grave, roots curling around something unseen. The windows were dusted over, the chimney cold, but the land felt watched, guarded, remembered. They said a woman sometimes came through town, quiet, sharp-eyed, wrapped in an old brown jacket 2 sizes too big. She never stayed long, bought salt, thread, bullets, always paid exact, never gave her name. She wore a carved bird on a leather string around her neck. Some thought she was a legend. Others whispered that she had once been part of something dark, a possession, a bounty, a scandal. But none dared ask. Because when she looked at you, she saw everything. And when she walked away, you somehow felt lighter, like she'd taken a piece of your pain with her. Out near Red Hollow, a boy once found a letter inside a tin box wedged under a rock, dry, aged, folded neat. No name on it, just a drawing, a wooden bird, wings spread. Inside were words written in a slow, firm hand. She pointed at me like I mattered, not because I was strong, not because I could save her, but because I didn't ask her to be anyone else. That's how I knew I'd die for her, and not feel robbed. The boy kept the letter. Grew up telling the story of the cowboy who didn't chase glory, the girl who chose the one man who never asked for anything in return. People listened, some believed, some just liked the silence at the end. And somewhere, across state lines, in a town without a name, a woman sat in the doorway of a one-room shack, carving birds for children who had lost too much too soon. She never told them why, but every time she finished one, she whispered into the wood before handing it over. And if you listened close enough, you might still hear it on the wind. You're not alone, not anymore.